Imagine stepping out the door on a cold, crisp spring morning, right in your own neighborhood. You hop on a bike, you're pedaling hard into this stiff headwind. The air is so sharp, it burns your lungs just a little bit.
Yeah, that classic, really bracing early spring feeling.
Exactly. And then suddenly you're hit with a smell that just stops you in your tracks. It's thick, it's acrid, and it smells exactly like someone is burning a pile of old car tires right in the middle of a picturesque field.
Which is a very jarring sensory experience. I mean, you're expecting the scent of damp earth and maybe blooming flowers, and instead you get the unmistakable stench of heavy industry.
Right, which is exactly what happened to two locals. Let's call them Kesser and Steen. So they're out for this morning ride. They're cycling past a local vineyard tucked away behind a neighbor named Gunnar's property. And as they look out over the rows of vines, they see dozens of these heavy iron buckets sitting directly in the soil.
Just billowing smoke, right?
Yeah, just billowing thick black smoke straight into the freezing air.
So naturally, they start trying to reverse engineer what they're looking at. I think Kessler's first instinct is to assume the vineyard is experimenting with, that trendy agricultural practice called biochar.
And biochar is fascinating in its own right, honestly, but it completely fails to explain the burning rubber smell.
Right, because true biochar isn't just setting a bonfire in a field.
Exactly. It's a highly controlled process. It's called pyrolysis. You take organic matter, things like leftover straw, wood chips, or, agricultural waste, and you bake it at around 500 degrees Celsius in a specialized kiln that is entirely deprived of oxygen.
And that lack of oxygen is the critical mechanism there. Because fire requires oxygen to combust material into ash, right? So starving the environment means the organic matter doesn't actually burn away.
Yeah, instead the intense heat just bakes off all the volatile gases and leaves behind this pure, incredibly porous carbon structure.
Which farmers love, by the way, because you bury that porous carbon in the soil and it acts like a microscopic sponge. It holds on to water, nutrients, all of that.
Plus, it essentially locks away atmospheric carbon in the ground for centuries, so it's a massive win for the climate. But as Kesser and Steen quickly realized, baking clean organic matter in a sealed, oxygen-free vacuum does not produce clouds of thick, tire-scented smoke out in the open air.
No, definitely
Yeah.
not. Which means they weren't looking at a trendy soil supplement at all. They had stumbled onto the front lines of a very desperate, highly engineered war against nature.
And that is the true mission of today's deep dive. We're looking at what Kesser and Steen were witnessing, the fight against the devastating late spring frost. So today we are going to unpack the incredibly complex, almost alien biological mechanisms that vines use to survive the cold.
It really is like alien biology.
It is. And we'll explore the mind-bending fluid dynamics and thermodynamics of how farmers use convection and, ironically, literal ice to keep plants warm. And finally, we'll get into the slightly sarcastic reality of why the wine industry is, well, perfectly happy to sell you the theatrical drama of it all.
Yeah, the drama is a big part of it. But to understand why those bonfires are burning in the first place, we really have to look at the massive biological gamble these farmers are taking. I mean, if you are running a vineyard in a cooler northern climate, places like Denmark or those newly expanding wine regions in Sweden and England, you are constantly fighting a very short clock.
Right. The growing season is just so brief.
Exactly. So you can't just plant any random grape. Viticulturists measure the life cycle of a vine against a standard baseline, which is almost always Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir has a very well-documented phenology.
Phenology meaning like the timing of when it breaks its buds, flowers, and ripens. Right.
Spot on. So to compensate for a short summer, farmers in cool climates intentionally plant specific varieties that break their buds significantly earlier than that Pinot Noir baseline.
Because they need that head start. They need to ensure the grapes have enough time to fully ripen before the autumn cold sets in.
Right, but that eagerness to wake up early carries a catastrophic risk.
Yeah.
If your vines break dormancy in April, but your local climate is prone to a sudden lingering frost in May, well, you are exposing the plant's most delicate, vulnerable tissue to freezing temperatures.
Which means the biology of the vine itself has to be engineered for resilience. And the mechanism it uses is honestly staggering. Like if you were to take a magnifying glass and dissect one of those dormant winter buds on the vine, you wouldn't just see a lump of, undifferentiated cells waiting to grow.
No, you would see a fully formed microscopic branch.
Yeah, It's a marvel of biological packaging. I mean, the plant spends a massive amount of its stored carbohydrate energy during the previous summer meticulously building this miniature structure.
Incredible.
Think of it like a densely packed piece of complex origami. Tucked inside that tiny protective casing, the plant has already folded up embryonic leaves, the precursor to flower buds, and the microscopic architecture of the grape clusters themselves.
And when spring hits, it just pumps water into the structure and unfurls it. It's like an endless measuring tape rolling out.
Exactly. But because the vine invests such a massive percentage of its stored energy into building that intricate little package, losing it to a rogue frost would normally be a death sentence, right?
It would be. So the plant has evolved a brilliant failsafe. What looks like a single bud on the vine is actually a node containing 3 distinct buds, just nested together.
It's literally a biological backup system. It reminds me of a character in a video game spawning with exactly 3 lives.
That's a perfect analogy. Or like a set of Russian nesting dolls, meticulously packed away. When the first warm days of spring arrive, only the primary bud opens. It looks a bit like a tiny fuzzy fern unfurling.
And this primary bud is the plant's A-game, right?
Yes, exactly. It contains the most robust flower structures and has the highest potential for yielding fruit.
But let's say a devastating morning frost rolls through and the temperature drops. The water inside those delicate new cells freezes, expands, and literally shatters the cell walls. That primary bud turns brown and dies.
The plant has just lost its first life.
Yeah, it's a severe blow, but the plant immediately pivots to the second nesting doll. It initiates the growth of the secondary bud.
Right. And the second attempt will bloom significantly later, which is dangerous for the farmer fighting this short season. And the overall yield of grapes will definitely be compromised, but it will still try its hardest to reproduce and create seeds.
But what if the weather turns completely brutal? Let's say it gets unseasonably freezing, what Kesser and Steen's local farmers might describe as dark as deep down in hell. A second, deeper frost hits, and that secondary bud is destroyed as well.
That is the moment the plant plays its final card. The tertiary bud opens. But this one is fundamentally different from the first 2.
Right, because if the plant is down to its third life, it knows the season is totally lost. It abandons reproduction entirely, doesn't it?
Exactly. The tertiary bud rarely produces any flowers, and certainly no viable fruit. It is purely an emergency survival mechanism. The energy required to unpack this third bud is immense, and the plant just uses it to deploy a basic set of leaves.
So it's essentially deploying emergency solar panels. The plant gives up on making wine for the farmer. It switches into this biological idle mode, using those minimal leaves to photosynthesize just enough sunlight to rebuild its starch reserves.
It's playing the long game. It's trying to gather enough energy to survive the winter and build new buds for the following year.
It is a total economic loss for the farmer, but a triumph of survival for the vine.
Which brings us back to the sheer panic of the farmers. Knowing that their vines only have these limited backup plans, you can totally understand why Kesser and Steen saw those iron buckets of fire lining the vineyard.
Oh, absolutely. But let's pause and look at the physics here for a second, because lighting a few dozen glorified campfires out in an open, sprawling outdoor farm seems, well, completely futile.
It does seem crazy when you first think about it.
Right, because a bucket of fire isn't outputting enough thermal energy to heat acres of open sky. As Kesser and Steen realized, a few candles in a field aren't going to output enough joules to melt the South Pole in an afternoon. How on earth does a bucket of fire heat an entire outdoor farm? You'd need the energy equivalent of a small city's power grid to actually raise the ambient temperature using radiant heat.
And that right there is the core misconception. The goal of those heavy iron buckets, which are often called smudge pots or vineyard candles, isn't radiant heating at all. It's fluid dynamics. They're utilizing the mechanics of convection.
So they're trying to move the air rather than bake the plants.
Precisely. We have to look at the specific enemy they're fighting. They aren't usually battling an incoming weather front with, high winds and snow. They're battling something called a radiation frost.
And that happens on those perfectly still, clear nights, right?
Yes, exactly. On crystal clear spring nights. Without a blanket of clouds to trap the day's warmth, the thermal energy stored in the Earth's surface just radiates straight up and escapes into the upper atmosphere.
And as the Earth rapidly loses heat, the layer of air physically touching the ground gets exceptionally cold.
And cold air is significantly denser and heavier than warm air. When you look at the landscape at, say, 3 in the morning during a radiation frost, that cold air behaves exactly like water. It flows down the sides of hills, seeking the lowest possible elevation, and pools there.
So, in a valley or a slight depression, this creates a literal, invisible lake of freezing air drowning the vines.
That's a perfect way to picture it.
Oh,
While paradoxically, there is a distinct layer of slightly warmer air hovering just 30 or 40 feet above them. It creates a thermal inversion, like an invisible atmospheric lid trapping the freezing air down at the surface.
Okay, so when the farmers light those bonfires, they aren't trying to warm the freezing lake itself.
No, not at all.
The concentrated column of heat from the fire creates this powerful, localized updraft. It acts like a thermal drill, punching a hole straight through that invisible lid.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
The updraft breaks the stratification. It forces a convection current that reaches up, grabs that warmer air from the inversion layer, and mechanically stirs it back down into the vineyard, completely displacing the heavy freezing air.
That makes perfect sense. The convection current is the whole point. It's the same reason you sometimes see massive wind machines, which are essentially just airplane propellers on tall poles, or even helicopters hovering over vineyards at night.
Yeah, the helicopters are amazing to see,
Yeah.
but they're doing the exact same job mechanically, just mixing the warm air aloft with the freezing air below.
Which really highlights why microclimate mastery is the most critical decision a farmer makes long before they ever plant a single vine. The physical topography totally dictates whether your farm will survive. I mean, if you plant near the coast, the ocean acts as a colossal thermal battery.
Right, absorbing heat during the day and slowly releasing it at night, which naturally buffers against extreme temperature drops.
But if you are inland, you are entirely at the mercy of the terrain. You have to design the vineyard to actively manage the drainage of that invisible cold air. You deliberately plant on slopes so the heavy freezing air can flow past the vines and drain away into lower, unoccupied land.
And the alignment of the vines is crucial there too. You have to orient the rows parallel to the slope. If you plant the rows horizontally across the face of the hill, the dense canopy of the vines acts like a series of retaining walls.
Oh, right. Horizontal rows would just dam up the downward flow of that dense air, pooling the freezing temperatures right against the delicate buds.
Exactly. Farmers even have to be ruthless about their landscaping. A thick row of trees or a dense decorative hedge at the bottom of a hill will act as a dam, causing the freezing air lake to back up and flood the vineyard above it.
It is incredible to think about farmers having to engineer the flow of invisible nocturnal rivers. But if convection engines and fire buckets seem extreme, let's advance the timeline to Kesser and Steen's bike ride the very next morning, because they stumbled upon a frost defense mechanism that defies every instinct you have about how cold works.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
They see a vineyard actively being blasted by massive industrial water cannons while the temperature is well below freezing.
It is a stunning visual and deeply, deeply counterintuitive.
It seems like sheer madness. I mean, spraying freezing water on a freezing plant to protect it from freezing, that sounds like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It sounds like a guaranteed way to encase your entire crop in ice and destroy it instantly.
To understand why it's not madness, we really have to look at the insights gathered by researchers like Professor Hendricks, who specialize in thermodynamics. The solution to this paradox lies entirely in the bizarre, almost magical behavior of water at exactly 0 degrees Celsius. We have to dive into a concept called the latent heat of fusion.
Okay, so normally thermodynamics is pretty straightforward. You add thermal energy to a pot of water on the stove, the molecules move faster, and the temperature rises. You put it in the freezer, you extract thermal energy, the molecules slow down, and the temperature drops.
Right. But when water hits exactly 0 degrees Celsius, that linear relationship completely breaks down. It hits an energetic plateau, meaning even if the ambient air around the water drops to -3 or -4 degrees, actively pulling thermal energy away, the water's temperature will fundamentally refuse to drop below 0 until every single liquid drop has transitioned into solid ice.
Wait, so it hits an energetic plateau, meaning all that ambient cold isn't actually lowering the temperature anymore, it's just doing the mechanical work of locking those loose water molecules together.
That is precisely the mechanism. During that phase shift, the energy isn't changing the temperature. When water molecules slow down enough to freeze, they don't just stop moving. They have to form rigid hydrogen bonds to lock into a crystalline lattice.
Right.
And forming those intricate bonds actually releases a massive payload of kinetic energy outward into the environment.
And the sheer volume of that energy is what completely floored me. Forcing liquid water to restructure into solid ice releases the exact same amount of thermal energy that it would take to heat that same volume of water from 0 degrees all the way up to 80 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, which is roughly 176 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is a staggering
It's an immense release of latent heat. Think of it as sweating in reverse. When a human sweats, the liquid water absorbs heat from your skin in order to evaporate into a gas, which cools you down, right?
Yeah.
Well, when water freezes, it must expel heat into its immediate surroundings in order to solidify into ice, which actively warms whatever it's touching.
Wow. So the farmer uses the water cannons to continuously coat the vines in liquid water. As the brutal negative-degree air tries to freeze the delicate plant, it freezes the liquid water on the surface instead. And as that surface water constantly transitions into ice, it constantly sheds that massive payload of latent heat directly onto the bud.
Yes. And as long as the farmer keeps spraying fresh liquid water, the phase shift never stops. Heat is continuously released, forming a protective ice jacket.
That is so cool.
The ambient air might be -4 degrees, but the interior of that ice jacket and the delicate biological origami resting inside it remains perfectly mathematically stable at exactly 0 degrees.
Which is just warm enough to keep the cellular walls of the bud from freezing and shattering. The ice is literally acting as a furnace.
It is a brilliant application of physics, but it comes with a terrifying level of risk. First of all, the sheer volume of water required is astronomical. You generally only see this technique deployed in regions with virtually unlimited fresh water, like the agricultural belts near Toronto or Niagara Falls.
And the margin for error is zero.
Absolutely zero,
Yeah.
because it relies on a continuous phase shift. If a water pump fails at 2 in the morning, or a pipe freezes and the liquid water stops flowing over the vines, the phase shift finishes. The latent heat stops being released.
And suddenly, the plant is trapped inside a solid block of ice, and the temperature of that ice will rapidly plummet to match the -4 degree ambient air, flash freezing the tissue and instantly annihilating the entire crop.
Exactly.
Total devastation.
You are riding a razor's edge, relying on industrial pumps to outsmart the laws of nature, which leads to the ultimate so what question. If you're taking all this in, you're probably wondering why go to war at all? If cultivating grapes in these cool northern climates requires deploying fleets of helicopters, running massive industrial water cannons all night, mastering fluid dynamics and lighting thousands of literal buckets of fire, why do it?
That's a very fair question.
Why not just concede defeat and grow all the world's wine in sunny, warm places where you can actually sleep through the night?
Well, it's a question of economics and chemistry, and the answer revolves entirely around one specific element: acidity.
Not sugar content, not alcohol percentage. No, it's really the acidity. While sugar ferments into alcohol, the actual architecture of a great wine, the thing that gives it structure, freshness, and longevity, is acidity. Specifically, the delicate balance of tartaric and malic acids that are naturally present in the grape.
Because without enough acidity, a wine tastes entirely flat, overly heavy, and what the industry calls jammy, right?
Yeah, exactly. It loses its complex aromas and just becomes fatiguing to drink.
And the climate is the ultimate governor of that acidity.
It is. In historically warm climates, the intense sun drives rapid photosynthesis and massive sugar accumulation. But the high heat also causes the grape to increase its cellular respiration, which rapidly burns off the malic acid. Today, with the climate shifting and temperatures rising globally, historically famous vineyards in hot regions are facing an existential crisis. Their grapes are ripening far too quickly.
They end up with massive amounts of sugar, which ferments into skyrocketing alcohol levels, while the natural acidity is entirely baked out of the fruit. They're losing the structural balance that made them famous.
Whereas the cool climates, despite all the terrifying late frosts we just talked about, offer the perfect countermeasure. A cool climate forces a very slow, agonizingly long ripening process. The sugars accumulate gradually over a longer season, but the cool temperatures prevent the grape from metabolizing its natural acids.
So you get grapes that achieve complex physiological ripeness, deeply layered aromas, and they retain incredibly high levels of vibrant acidity.
And that acidity is the holy grail of modern premium winemaking. It's why those northern regions are rapidly becoming the new frontier. The quality of the wine produced by that slow, cool ripening is so exceptionally high that it justifies the massive expense of the water cannons and the night shifts.
Which brings us back to Kesser and Steen finishing their bike ride and the wonderfully sarcastic realization that kind of ties this entire deep dive together. The relentless pursuit of acidity is a genuine botanical necessity. The physics of convection and latent heat are very real. But as these two locals point out, well, the farmers are also keenly aware of the optics. They absolutely love the drama.
Oh, they do. The theatricality of it all certainly serves a secondary purpose.
It is undeniably stunning marketing. I mean, imagine the photography. An ancient vineyard glowing under the stars with thousands of fiery cauldrons, thick smoke billowing into the night, frost glistening on the vines. You aren't just selling a bottle of fermented grape juice anymore.
You are selling an epic narrative.
You're selling the heroic tale of man battling the elements. You're inviting the consumer to taste the survival of the fittest bud plucked from the jaws of a freezing hell. And quite conveniently, that sweeping, dramatic narrative of helicopters and thermal convection is incredibly useful when you need to justify a nice markup on the price of the wine.
Because running water cannons and coordinating night crews of farmhands to light smudge pots is phenomenally expensive. The theater helps absorb the capital cost.
It's the perfect marriage of necessary agricultural engineering and high-end marketing. So, to wrap up our journey today, what began as a confusing, smoky morning bike ride through the neighborhood turned out to be a masterclass in the extremes of survival. We've unpacked how vines use a densely folded three-stage biological origami to outsmart a freezing morning.
Yeah, the 3 lives.
We've seen how farmers map the invisible fluid dynamics of cold air using thermal drills of fire to shatter inversion layers.
And we explore the sheer thermodynamic magic of using freezing water to release latent heat, creating precise 0-degree protective jackets.
Right. And we discovered that all of this sleepless panic, all of this intense engineering is ultimately driven by the quest for the perfectly balanced, highly acidic grape, all wrapped up in a brilliant, fiery marketing campaign.
It is an incredible synthesis of biology, physics, and sheer human stubbornness. And I think this leaves us with a compelling final thought. The extreme lengths these viticulturists go to manipulate their microclimates highlights a delicate, invisible balance we rarely notice in our own daily lives.
What should we be looking out for?
Well, next time you take a walk or a bike ride in your own neighborhood at dusk, pay close attention to the subtle shifts in the air around you. Notice the sudden, sharp temperature drop as you walk down a hill into a slight hollow in the road.
Oh, yeah, you can always feel that chill right at the bottom.
Exactly. Or notice the way the air feels stagnant and heavy right before you pass a row of dense trees. We are constantly surrounded by these invisible thermal lakes and rivers. We just don't have millions of dollars of crops depending on us noticing them.
It really makes you look at a simple hill in a completely different way.
It does, and it makes you wonder, as the global climate continues to shift, becoming hotter and far more unpredictable, will the future of premium agriculture slowly pivot away from finding the perfect natural location? Will it become entirely dependent on who has the capital and the advanced technology to engineer the most dramatic artificial microclimate right in their own backyard?
Are we just going to be terraforming our own valleys to keep the wine balanced? That is a wild, wild thought to end on. So the next time you're pedaling into a crisp headwind and you catch the scent of burning tires, don't just assume it's an eco-friendly biochar experiment. Think about the intricate biology, the phase-shifting physics, and the epic, fiery battle for the perfect glass of wine happening right in your neighborhood.